This is where I share a synthesis of focus topics and vocal readings of the passages most prominent to me. Today, I'm sharing from Book 51 in my Book Week series, Ecodharma by David R. Loy. Buddhism is currently thought of in a number of different ways, and many of those ways may seem to oppose others. Many think of Buddhism as an individualizing activity, whereby a person looks quietly within for insight, with the intention of building peace of mind for him or herself. Many who have thoroughly navigated a Buddhist path may object to this, having experienced a reconnection to the self with a capital S, beyond the clutter of thought form that our ego constructs are composed of. Through its examination of Buddhism, Ecodharma vivifies a tandem approach to the ecological crisis, illustrating the potency of combining the inner work of meditation, mindfulness, and contemplation with the outer work of activism, or concisely framed, the ecosattva path, anchored in our intention that our practice not contribute to a surrender to the status quo. We may reinvigorate the expansion of our peripheral, engaging our peace of mind toward the health of the sacred all that we recollect through our awakening process. Without further ado, I'll move on toward the vocal readings from this wonderful book. Enjoy. Ecodharma, Buddhist Teachings for the Ecological Crisis. David R. Loy, author of Money, Sex, War, Karma. There's good news and there's bad news. The bad news: civilization as we know it is about to end. Now the good news: civilization as we know it is about to end. Page 2 to 3. The extraordinary irony is that we have become so obsessed with exploiting and abusing our actual treasure, a flourishing biosphere with healthy forests and topsoil, lakes and oceans full of marine life, an unpolluted atmosphere, in order to maximize something that in itself has no value whatsoever, namely digital numbers and bank accounts. Because all the world's economies are wholly owned subsidiaries of the Earth's biosphere, our preoccupation with ever-increasing production and consumption is now disrupting the ecosystems of our planet. Another important factor should not be overlooked. We abuse the Earth in the ways we do because our predominant worldview about nature rationalizes that misuse. It is our collective misunderstanding of what the world is and who we are that encourages obsession with economic growth and consumption. Page 34. Both individually and collectively, we often pursue our own benefit at the cost of others' well-being in ways that the eco-crisis repudiates, because we're all in this together, or better, because we're all part of each other. A planet carved up into over 200 little gods, i.e. nations, each beholden to nothing greater than itself, yet bounded by the geographical limits and ambitions of the other gods around it, is always going to be problematic. And from an ecological perspective, the nation-state system doesn't function very well today. When China burns coal, the air pollution produced doesn't remain only in Chinese skies, nor does radioactive water from the Fukushima nuclear disaster stay inside Japanese coastal waters. The ecological crisis is rubbing our noses into the basic fact we keep trying to ignore, like it or not. In the most important sense, we're all one. Page 66. Buddhism is a path that, if all goes well, deconstructs itself. Although Buddhism can be a marker of ethnic or cultural identity, one more thing to cling to, meditation tends to undermine such dualistic affiliations. I'm a Buddhist, not a ... There's nothing liberative about such labels. The important thing is whether or not one is a practitioner. Ironically, we discover what we seek by opening up to the groundlessness we have been fleeing. Page 102. The act of grasping creates both the grasper and the grasped. The sense of a self inside that feels separate from the objectified world outside. In doing so, we constantly overlook that the forms we grasp by naming, including ourselves, are the presencing of a generative no-thingness that is nameless, formless, and wondrous. I'm skipping down a bit here. Since awakening involves realizing that we are not separate from each other or from the earth, it becomes apparent that the ways we live together and relate to the earth need to be reconstructed as well. And that means collective engagement with social dukkha, working together to challenge the problematic economic and political structures that are deeply implicated in the environmental crisis and the social justice issues that confront us today, in experiencing our day-to-day human worlds mainly as a collection of utensils. We've objectified the natural world into a collection of resources to be exploited. The eco-crisis raises a question that has become inescapable. Do we own the earth, or does the earth own us? Moreover, do we need to reevaluate the concept of ownership? Page 112 to 113. When will we consume enough? When will corporate profits and stock prices and our collective gross national product be large enough? When will we have all the technology we need? These questions seem odd because we know there are no limits to those ever-escalating processes. But isn't there something odd about that? Why is more and more always better if it can never be enough? If progress means walking forward, how do we know we are headed in the right direction? Are we trying to go somewhere, or are we trying to get away from something? We are back in the now familiar issue of means and ends. It's another version of the problem with power, which is a good servant but a poor master. Technological and economic growth in themselves may be valuable means insofar as they can provide the resources to accomplish what we want to do. They are not good as ends in themselves because they cannot answer the basic human question about what it means to be human and what we should be doing with all those resources. Since, however, we have no other answer to that basic question, none that we collectively agree on anyway, technological and economic development have become, in effect, a substitute. The means have become the ends. They function as forms of secular salvation that we seek but never quite attain. Not knowing where to go or what to value, our civilization has become obsessed with ever-increasing power and control. Page 140. Despair and grief are not hindrances that interfere with our wholehearted engagement, but an essential part of the Ecodharma path. It's not enough to accept the scientific evidence or understand how language organizes our perceptions in problematic ways. We must feel more deeply in order to be transformed more deeply in Zen language, in order to solve the great collective koan of our time, how to respond to the horrific things we are doing to the earth and to ourselves. That means opening up to the repressed grief and despair that so often paralyze us, whereupon they can transform into compassionate action. Page 160. Mudita is the happiness we feel when sharing in the well-being of others. Instead of suffering with of compassion, one enjoys with, like a mother delighting in the joy of her child. This trait complements karuna, which can otherwise overwhelm our ability to empathize. The vast amount of suffering in the world does not mean we should not be cheerful. In fact, if our relationship with the world is not also a source of happiness, our ability to address that suffering will itself suffer. Among other things, spending time in the natural world, communing with its other inhabitants, appreciating its serenity and beauty, can motivate and empower us to work for its well-being.